The legacy of Harrogate Manor was not one of wealth or fond memories, but of silence and decay. It stood on the fringes of the desolate Blackwood Mire, a hulking stone beast gradually surrendering to the creeping ivy and the ceaseless, mournful wind. When the solicitor's letter arrived, informing Silas of his distant relative's passing and the unexpected inheritance of the estate, a morbid curiosity warred with a deep, instinctual dread. He accepted, drawn perhaps by the sheer weight of the house's forgotten history. Weeks later, Silas found himself alone within its echoing halls, the air thick with the scent of mildew and forgotten lives. The attic was a sarcophagus of the past, crammed with trunks and shredded furniture. It was there, beneath a moth-eaten tarpaulin, that he found the crate. It was sealed, heavy with something more than just objects. Inside, nestled amongst brittle photograph albums and yellowed correspondence, were vis tapes. Most were labeled mundanely, Christmas, somewhere at the coast. But one tape stood apart. It bore no label, save for a single, jagged scratch that looked less like a mark and more like a wound on the plastic casing. A sense of foreboding settled upon him, cold and cloying. Ignoring it, as mortals often do when confronted by the veil, Silas carried the tape down to the drawing room, where a dusty old fur lurked in the corner. He inserted the cassette. The screen flickered to life with a burst of static that sounded like a choked scream. The footage was grainy, unstable. It showed a room, once perhaps a nursery, now draped in shadow and neglect. Peeling wallpaper curled like dead skin. A broken window pane emitted only a sliver of gray light. A crib stood in the center, and from it issued the thin, reedy cry of an infant, a sound that twisted something deep within Silas' gut. The camera shook, as if held by trembling hands, panning across the room, lingering on dust motes dancing in the weak light, and snapping back to the crib. There was a fleeting movement in the periphery, a shadow detaching itself from another shadow or figure. It moved with an unsettling slowness, just a silhouette against the wall. Silas watched, a morbid fascination holding him captive. He replayed segments, trying to discern details. The figure grew clearer in subsequent, disjointed clips on the tape. It was Aunt Seraphina, the eccentric, reclusive relative whose madness had been whispered about in hushed tones within the family. But this was not mere eccentricity. This was something broken, something haunted. Her eyes in the few frames they were visible were white and vacant, fixed on the crib. She paced the small room like a caged animal, muttering incessantly, though the audio was mostly lost to static and the baby's cries. The horror deepened with each viewing. The room seemed to decay further on the tape, the shadows becoming more aggressive, stretching and coiling in the corners. Seraphina's movements became jerky, unnatural. She would stand over the crib, whispering urgently to the unseen infant, her voice a low, sibilant hiss that occasionally pierced the static, laced with desperation and fear. Was she comforting the child, or addressing something else? One sequence was particularly harrowing. The camera was steadier now, placed somewhere in the room, fixed on the crib. Seraphina entered the frame, holding something adult, a bundle of rags, close to her chest. Her face, though obscured by shadow, seemed contorted with anguish or perverse determination. She knelt by the crib, placing the object within it. Then, she began to trace symbols on the floor around the crib with a dark, viscous substance. Her muttering intensified, rising into a frantic, pleading chant that seemed to summon the very darkness that clung to the room. The baby's cries escalated into terrifying screams, suddenly cut short. A guttural sound escaped Seraphina's lips, a sound of effort and agony, as if tearing something from her own soul. The climax arrived with horrifying finality in the last segment. The camera was on the floor, tilted upwards. Serafina's face filled the frame, illuminated by a strange, flickering light that wasn't from the broken window. Her eyes were no longer vacant. They were burning with a feverish, unnatural intensity. A thin, dark trickle ran from her mouth. She held the object from the crib aloft, her hands trembling. The shadows in the room surged, coalescing around her. A low, resonant hum filled the audio. Not static, but something deeper, older. Serafina screamed, a sound of pure terror and surrender. And then the scream dissolved into chaos, a maelstrom of static, warped colors, and sounds that defied description. The word and died, spitting the tape back out. Silas sat in the silent drawing room, the defunct tape cold in his hand. The baby's cries, Serafina's frantic whispers, the final, unholy hum they echoed in the sudden quiet of Harrogate Manor. He had just watched a tape. He had witnessed a gateway opening, a desperate act performed in the face of an encroaching darkness. The tape felt heavy, not with plastic and magnetic film, but with the weight of the horror it contained. It felt like a memory that was not his, yet now clung to him, a chilling echo from the forgotten nursery, forever bound to the rotting cradle.